having diversity and having a seat at the table and representation from a huge, I'm not saying that our thousands of people are fully represented, but it's important that we have people from Kenya, East Africa, sub-Saharan Africa participating in the development of AI. I think it's incredibly important that you have women helping
Absolutely.
drive and structure this data. We have 53% of our company as women. That was a purposeful action, equal pay, equal job opportunity because of the, building an ecosystem and the contribution to the communities. But imagine a world where the only people who sourced your data, collected your data, structured and built your models were men.
Welcome back to the Eric Ries Show. Today, an ethical AI company governed by a nonprofit makes the conversion to a for-profit. No, it hasn't been in the news lately. It hasn't made headlines because they did it properly. My guest today is Wendy Gonzalez, CEO of Sama. You probably don't realize this, but you've used Sama many times in your life because the people who work at Sama provide the basic training data for self-driving cars, for automated driving, for all kinds of AI systems at Microsoft, Ford, Walmart, and many others. But they're a different kind of AI company because they provide training and jobs with equitable pay and benefits to people who face employment barriers all over the world. Sama has had a fascinating trajectory as a company. As I mentioned, it began as a nonprofit and then went through an evolution to a dual company structure, a for-profit that can raise money to fund growth, and a foundation with its own programs and goals, which you'll hear about later. The foundation holds majority ownership in the for-profit, ensuring it never strays from its mission. I call this a mission-controlled company. What's interesting about an ethical company like Sama, as you'll hear Wendy describe, is that it seems like the project of a do-gooder. And yet, the mission of Sama, including its commitments to its people, are ultimately what led to an extremely profitable pivot into the world of AI long before anyone saw that coming. Sama was the brainchild and lifelong passion of its founder, Leila Janah, who sadly passed away in 2020. She was a force of nature. But her vision for what she called dignified work as a way for people to not only gain their own financial independence, but spread prosperity in their communities is thriving in both parts of the company. The foundation that bears her name and the company that is her legacy. Wendy shared a lot of the details about the advantages of being a company that puts human potential and intelligence first in everything it does. And along the way, I feel like she demonstrates that many of the things we've been taught about how to succeed in business aren't the only way or even the best way. The advantages of being a company that puts human potential and intelligence first in everything it does show that many of the so-called best practices of business really aren't. I know you're going to find lessons and inspiration in Sama as a model for others looking to make a similar leap. Here's my conversation with Wendy Gonzalez. The Eric Ries Show is brought to you by Mercury, the bank account I actually use for my startup. I've been around a lot of startups and a lot of fintech products over the years. People often think the way to simplify the complexity of finance is to add layer upon layer upon layer of software and automations and workflows. And all that winds up with is a really complicated mess. Mercury's figured out the thing that really matters, the bank account. If all of your workflows, all of your automations are driven from the place where the data and the money already are, life gets a lot simpler. Mercury simplifies your financial operations with powerful banking, giving you greater control, precision, and speed so you can operate at your best. We all know speed is the ultimate advantage that startups possess. Your bank account needs to speed you up, not slow you down. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 200,000 ambitious startups that trust Mercury to simplify their finances and perform at their best. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust, members FDIC. This episode is brought to you by DigitalOcean, the cloud loved by developers and founders alike. Developing and deploying applications can be tough, but it doesn't have to be. Scaling a startup can be a painful road, but it doesn't have to be. When you have the right cloud infrastructure, you can skip the complexity and focus on what matters most. DigitalOcean offers virtual machines, managed Kubernetes, plus new solutions like GPU compute. With a renewed focus on ensuring excellent performance for users all over the world, DigitalOcean has the essential tools developers need for today's modern applications, with the predictable pricing that startups want. Join the more than 600,000 developers who trust DigitalOcean today with $200 in free credits and even more exclusive offers just for listeners at do.co/Eric. Terms and conditions apply.
Thank you again for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So I thought maybe a good place to start would be, and tell me if you think this analogy is strained or you find it legit. So when I first started getting involved in manufacturing, I got to travel the world and see how the things we take for granted every day are actually made. And it was kind of mind blowing. Like, I'd read plenty of books about mass production and manufacturing, and I treat the objects I get, for $25 at Walmart or whatever, like kind of like they're made by magic, and then they're disposable at the end. When I actually got to walk a factory floor and see just how much craft and care and like human energy goes into wiring up every single little button on your microwave, behind the plastic panel, I was kind of blew my mind. Tell me if you find this metaphor legit, because I was thinking a lot about what Sama does. And like the fact that we are talking about generative AI and these AI models kind of the same way, like they're these magical things trained on data. And we don't really appreciate the amount of labor that goes into the creating of them, not just by scientists who are studying model weights and transformers and things like that, but the huge amount of what they kind of, in a very sterile way, call reinforcement learning from human feedback, the data labeling and the feedback that goes on. And I wonder if you think that we've kind of become alienated as consumers from the humans who make possible the products that we use every day.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent analogy, Eric. I mean, I always tell my kids, it's like chicken doesn't come in packages from Safeway. They're stored and phrased and all these other things that happen. But AI is very much the same way. I like to think of it as the end-to-end supply chain for development of AI. And you made me smile when you said the care that goes into it, because we see that happen. People think that AI just happens. Your phone recognizes you, and that there actually is not only millions, if not hundreds of millions of images being used to be able to do that level of detection so you can classify your photo, but the fact that there was likely a human involved, nearly everyone in the care and attention instructions and training that they've taken to actually identify, ensure things are accurate, is something that I find pretty magical every day. But that's on the inside of this. I know on the outside it looks like the button you push on the microwave. So yeah, I appreciate that analogy.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that has always struck me about Sama is the fact that the mission is really about the humans who you touch first and foremost. And so maybe just talk a little bit about what the mission of the company is and why it spoke to you, why you wanted to get involved originally.
It's a great question. Well, the mission is based on of a really easy, sort of simple and fundamental belief, and that is that talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not. And so Sama actually means equal in Sanskrit, and the idea was, how do we level the playing field and create jobs and opportunities for people who've got the greatest barriers to employment? That's really the fundamental mission of Sama, and it really started from this notion that there's a lot of challenges in the world, poverty being the biggest one that causes, everything from wars to, maternal deaths and many other, just tragedies. And aid is usually the first thought is, how do we give aid? How do we support that? Let's build wells. Let's, send mosquito nets. And not that those are not good things, but the idea behind this was that actually what's a lot better than giving aid is giving work. So creating financial independence, people can then build and invest in their own communities. And that really is the gateway out of poverty, not aid, but work.
Certainly the first time I encountered Sama now many years ago, I certainly did not anticipate that one day it would be a leader in, really making advanced AI possible. How did you get from one to the other? I think it's such an interesting journey, and so typical of the startup journey, that where you start, when you start with a real sense of mission, it's going to take you to really interesting places. How did you get here?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. It's this idea of purposely hiring people on the basis of impact as opposed to on their skills. So normal employment processes. Where did you go to school? Do you have previous experience? But we were trying to do the opposite. We were trying to bring people from the informal economy into the formal economy. So by definition, that means when we are hiring on the basis of impact, meaning Do you not have a job? Are you underemployed? Are you making less than the $2, World Bank standard for poverty? That kind of presumes that they don't necessarily have skills coming into the job. And so when we were looking at, okay, we want to be able to create jobs in the formal economy, the digital economy became a really obvious thing to where, the challenge is there's a scarcity of jobs in region. You can do digital work from anywhere in the world. So it's a wonderful place where there's demand, and then we can kind of connect it with supply. With that being said, we knew we weren't going to come in and say, hey, guess what? We'll help develop code for you. That wouldn't make a lot of sense for people who don't have experience. So it was really focused around human judgment. So how can you leverage human judgment to do what was in the olden days, everything from transcription. So like take this business card and literally transcribe it into a digital format. You can leverage human judgment for that, all the way to, do you remember like Ask Jeeves? Before, like many, many, many years ago.
We're showing our age, but yes,
Yeah.
you and I both remember Ask Jeeves, sure.
I know what a fax machine is as well. So yeah, I'm definitely showing my age, but our company's age is that, in the beginning days, it was actually helping create the responses for like Ask Jeeves.
Wow.
Which weren't based off of AI. They were actually based off of human responses.
Yeah, Ask Jeeves was kind of like the original Q&A reinforcement learning through human feedback wannabe. That's so interesting how that's come back around. Ask ChatGPT is kind of the fulfillment of that dream.
Exactly.
So you're not the original founder of Sama, and I wonder if you could talk about, first of all, like your background. So how did you come into entrepreneurship? I know you had a long career in business before doing this, had worked in consulting, had worked in entrepreneurship. Like how did you decide to make that career change to come into what at that time I think was still a full nonprofit company, right?
Yeah, it was a full nonprofit. So it was quite a change. What basically it came to is that, did a lot of things in my career, kept getting smaller. So went from, large consultancies, then went to some public companies, but kept getting smaller and smaller until I decided I wanted to be a founder. So I co-founded an IoT startup, and that was great. And we were just, you work so hard as a founder. Like there's so much you have to do. And like all of the hours, I remember, 14, 15, 16 hour days. And then all during that time frame, I had three kids. So I had 3 little kids under 5 years old. We were getting to, 10 million ARR, and we were working so hard. And I just remember like sitting there with my husband. We would like go volunteer on the weekends. We did a lot of things to kind of try to figure out, how do we show them how you become part of a community, how you make the world a better place, and how to get engaged, because it's not, it's everybody's responsibility. It's like you see that, piece of trash on the road, you don't walk by it, you pick it up, you throw it in the garbage. Like these are things that we need to do is to show you as parents. And we started getting really frustrated. Like, wow, you have to be 13 years old to go and volunteer at the soup bank, and, many, many things. But at the end of the day, I got to this point to where I was like, okay, I'm working really, really hard to create these systems to help manage remote devices for like, humidors and like smart televisions and smart sprinkler systems, thinking to myself, okay, yeah, like I think I'm contributing, but I'm not really, really sure if I'm contributing the way that I thought I would. And decided it was time to actually take a look into social enterprise. And then my father passed away unexpectedly, and I was like, okay, this is it. There's no time to lose.
So talk about the original origin of Sama.
So Sama was founded in 2008 by Leila Janah. So she had a really interesting story behind this, but she actually, it all sort of started where she'd gotten into Harvard, she'd gotten a scholarship, and instead of going to take some of that money and her time off to go celebrate and do spring break, she decided to teach English in Ghana instead. And from that experience, she not only kind of decided that she wanted to focus on African studies and development economics, but had basically a revelation that here were these kids that were like listening to the BBC and knew more about the U.S. political system and government that her classmates did, literally. So she kind of walked away with that. She went to school. She went to go work for the World Bank for a while. It's an amazing institution, but it is a large bureaucracy, and was kind of like, I can't really do this. It's a lot to sort of affect change. And she started consulting and basically came up with this brainchild that, there are all these outsourcing companies that are out there. But she, while she was consulting for one of them, she recognized that some of the people that were actually supporting these large call centers, some of them came from the slums. So they may have had graduate degrees, they may have not had degrees. And she was like, well, wait a second. What if we can take this concept of delivering outsourcing, but instead of hiring on the basis of your degree, instead of hiring on your experience and from top graduates, what if we dug into basically the bottom of the pyramid, the people who've got the most barriers to employment? So what if we focused only on underserved communities and focused on women? Because when women succeed, communities succeed and children succeed. If we did this, we could solve this huge problem in poverty, because the biggest challenge is not the people and their talent. It's the lack of access to jobs that is really the critical thing. And so, to go back to one of your questions earlier, Eric, like why did I get connected to Sama? Well, that notion not only of giving work was hugely important, but I'm the child of immigrants. My husband is a zero generation Mexican immigrant who was the first person in his family to go to college. And so we kind of got to this place to where we're like, wow, like work and financial independence has afforded us this life and quite frankly the birth lottery as she called it, and like we line up to it. I was like looking at my kids, I'm like, wow, they're growing up in the Silicon Valley, they've got every chance to succeed in the world, but what if they hadn't? And so work has afforded us so many opportunities. And quite frankly, it was a lot of hard work, but it was also luck, right? Being in the right place, being in the right time. And what if you're in a situation where it's almost impossible to even have that luck? You have no network, you have no options or access. So that really spoke to me. And, beyond that, it was really about focus in Africa, because in sub-Saharan Africa, and this is like 2023 data, almost 86% of sub-Saharan Africa is in the informal economy.
Yeah, explain for those who don't know what the informal economy is.
So the informal economy is where you aren't salaried. It's a day-to-day job. So think of it as like showing up to be a day laborer at a construction site. And in the areas that Sama works in, it could be, baking snacks and selling them by the side of the road, selling secondhand clothes in a stall, collecting scrap metal, and bringing that money in for recycling, or bringing that in to earn money. And the challenge, obviously, is that number one is if you don't show up to work, you don't earn any money. So you're earning less than $2 a day. If you get sick, you're not getting anything. There are no benefits. There's no continuity, right? So the ability
you don't even have the protection of an employment contract of any kind.
You have no employment contract. You've literally no protections. If you go and do the work and somebody can't pay you, you don't get paid, right? There's no OSHA standards. There's none of that. And so if you're unable to get into the formal economy where you have a steady salary, you have benefits, and if you get sick, you get sick days. And if you want to take a vacation, you get break days. That stability is a tremendous lift up. And that is what our thesis was, hey, you do this helps break the poverty cycle, because not only do you have sustainable employment, but jobs beget jobs, right? So it's one thing to get the luck to have a job, but once even if you don't have that, perfect pedigree of education, once you have it on your CV, I've worked in an entry-level technology job, hopefully the goal is that the next group will hire you, and your ability to stay employed in the formal economy is much, much, much higher.
What I think is so interesting about that is, we're so used to, those of us born into tremendous privilege, thinking about low wage work as low skill work. But to make a living on $2 a day in the informal economy must require a level of determination and skill that, I know so many college graduates that wouldn't last 5 seconds in that environment, just who don't really work that hard and have never been asked to do that, and yet have the sense of superiority thanks to as you say, the luxury of the pure luck of their birth, the birth lottery, the tremendous education that we've all received. We're so incredibly fortunate. But on the other hand, it's cliche almost now for people to complain about the lack of grit and determination in the young people who don't want to work, and to how hard it is to find people to work. And on the other hand, to praise the kind of skill that I would guess the folks that you're talking about have in spades. So given the opportunity, I wouldn't be surprised if those skills actually, once they have the training, translate into tremendous success once they can get into the formal economy. Has that been what you found?
Absolutely. And that was kind of the entirety. Is you've got this incredible human capital that just hasn't had a chance to shine yet. And what you said made me smile a ton, because I know it is cliche. I know we've seen a lot of studies out there that like grit is basically the most important skill to like get hired and be successful in work. But what you said is exactly right. Our workforce has grit in spades. And they're all entrepreneurs as well. So what we've seen is when people come into the program, I think there's a couple of pretty interesting stats. So for a lot of NGOs, just in history, they used to pay people to sit in training. Okay, that's a very common NGO thing. You go in, you get paid. You're $4 a day. You sit in a seat, and you do that for 2 weeks, right? And then you may graduate, you may not. Biggest challenge is there's no job, even if you had gotten trained afterwards. So that doesn't help. So that was the big model. The big shift in model with Sama was, hey, not only are we going to give you training, but we're actually going to hire you, employ you into the formal economy. And you'll get a contract and benefits and, a salary and incentives. But what was really interesting is that we took the approach of, well, we're not going to pay you to go to training. And at first, this created a lot of pain. Eric, I got to tell you, people wouldn't show up. We'd have to I remember having, right when I joined, it was like going out into community centers and kind of being like, hey, show up. And then we would try to get women, because our focus has always been to hire at least 50% women. And it was like, we had to recruit hard because we're like, hey, well, we're not paying, which seemed like a really radical idea at the time. Or if we do, we're just going to give you subsidy to,
Well, explain the logic of it then. It seems counterintuitive.
It does seem counterintuitive. What we wanted people to show up because they wanted to go to get to an opportunity. The whole goal is to say, hey, you get to this training, we're going to give you a job opportunity. And what's happened since then is, despite the early rough day of explaining the opposite concept, which is, hey, we're not going to pay you to get here. We actually want you to be here and want you to try. We have a 99% graduation rate. People show up. And then once they graduate, we call them back when there's an opportunity for a job. Usually that's within weeks. Sometimes it can take a few months, depends on the cycles. And then from there, almost 85% graduate past the next training. Actually, I'm sorry, it's a little higher than that. It's actually about 89%. From there, of those 89%, that go into project training, which is the customer specific, things that require the next level of skill. The next 90% go. So, I mean, the from training all the way to getting to the production floor, the drop-off rate is less than 20%, which is pretty amazing.
Unheard of in these kinds of programs.
Yeah. So it's a long way of saying is that these jobs are super meaningful. And what was really interesting is that when we first started out, there was a lot of skepticism. But what happened was we really didn't do a lot of advertising. People just found that their cousins, their friends, their brothers and sisters were getting jobs. So exactly. So it became a word of mouth. And now the wait list for our training program is almost 60,000. Wow. And that's not with advertisement. That's just people going, wow, you train here, you'll actually get a job.
Talk a little bit about the founder, because she was a really special person and will be really dearly missed. Do you want to just say what it was like to meet her for the first time and her vision for the world?
Yeah. Leila was absolutely incredible. One of the brightest lights I think that anybody could ever meet. So passionate. I'm like 100 million ideas. But I very much remember my first meeting. I was like, okay, I'm coming from the corporate world. I'm literally getting, thinking about quitting a startup I co-founded because this is so compelling. So I walk into the office. It's a funky office on one of the last ungentrified blocks in San Francisco. It's like right in this really rough corner where there was this really rough Walgreens and a McDonald's that got shut down 6 months later. Anyway, it was interesting. So I get in there and she's got this gigantic green smoothie, this like huge German Shepherd. And I was like, "Hello, your dog. What's your dog's name?" She's like, "It's Angela Merkel." I was like, okay, I think these are my people. Like, gigantic great. It was just a really, really amazing experience. And I got a chance to spend some time with her to say, like, where did this come from? Understand really what drove the passion. And she had just such intense belief that this, giving work and financial independence was going to solve, poverty. And that if this idea could catch on, and we weren't the only ones to do it, we could be a pioneer in it, but we could really promote this idea of impact sourcing and hiring in underserved communities, that boy, if, $1 trillion is spent, right, that goes through like procurement systems, imagine if just one of those billion was spent in impact sourcing. Imagine the amount of jobs and economies that you could create. And then think about the impact of the world for sub-Saharan Africa, where it's the youngest and fastest growing population in the world. If hundreds of millions, actually billions of jobs aren't created, that could be a global financial crisis for not just sub-Saharan Africa, but basically for the world, right? So anyhow,
it reminds a squandering of talent on just an unbelievable scale.
And exactly, because it's a bit of an overused term, but Africa being the future, it's true, right? Like, there's so much talent, there's so much activity happening, and it is the most youthful population in the world, right? And so to hear her passion of, hey, you can grow this kind of one kernel, and if we can do this as Sama, so that was her pitch to me was, hey, she's just like, hey, let's get sustainable. So in the nonprofit world, that means earn enough revenue to cover your costs. She's like, if we can get there, that's the holy grail milestone, and then we're going to be this like kind of proof point. And so that's really what was so incredible about her, is this one idea could turn into something that was, world changing, right? And just a handful of actions could turn into a movement. So yeah, I was really inspired.
Talk about the decision to go to sub-Saharan Africa in the first place. Like, why there among all the regions in the world?
I think it just started with her background in, African studies. And she had met a classmate at Harvard whose father was a professor at Jomo Kenyatta University in Kenya. And so it started as kind of a natural point of where she could get connected to, talented people, youth, and having, kind of an ecosystem to work within.
So one of the things I find most striking about the Sama story is kind of what happened next, that ultimately you made the conversion from a foundation, nonprofit, to a for-profit company. And that was kind of like a niche interest area of mine, companies that are partially or completely controlled, owned, just founded out of nonprofits. That was not very interesting to most people until very recently, when, of course, that topic blew up in a major way with OpenAI and the drama that had to do with their unique governance. And so I thought maybe there will actually be a renewed I think there could be a renewed interest in the relationship of nonprofits to for-profits. And I think one of your board members even wrote an article, which we'll link to in the show notes, about how to spin a for-profit out of a nonprofit the right way, unlike some issues that have come up elsewhere. And anyway, so without getting into it, we don't need to comment on OpenAI. I know that's something we need to do. Maybe just talk about the process. You were there through that whole arc of deciding to create the Sama subsidiary and to eventually convert into a for-profit company, and still yet have a role and an economic interest for the foundation. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a couple of things. So, first off, we got to sustainability, and one of those pathways you'd asked about how did we get started. Well, we started in human judgment. And when I joined, we were doing lots of things, everything from the Ask Jeeves and Ancestry.com type. We're doing transcriptions and things of that nature. And I noticed there was a couple of really interesting projects we were doing around artificial intelligence. They had to do with computer vision, training data. And at the time, it was about like setting up the first Xbox, making sure that, if you were to do Dance Dance Revolution, the video game would actually match your movements as well as possible. And so it was a really interesting time to where it became pretty clear to me that AI was an incredible opportunity because the need for human judgment and for humans in the loop. Now, granted, back then, not everybody, reinforcement learning and, supervised learning, those weren't common terms. But it was really clear that there was this huge need. And so we started to focus in that area. I was like, okay, we're a nonprofit, but we're going to take our small engineering team and our small marketing and sales team, and we're going to focus it towards this area. We grew quite a bit. We got ourselves to be, interestingly enough, a profitable nonprofit in that state. But one of the things that was really clear, especially with AI and especially with focus on data, was that we were going to need to put a lot more into the software because you just can't do this work without having a really good technical platform. So that was the conversation Leila and I had, was about, hey, it's not just about achieving this sort of financial success. It's way more about what is the future going to hold and how to create more jobs. And, we looked at each other and said, hey, the only way we really are able to create more jobs is going to be by, taking on some fairly significant investment to really build a leading software platform. And of course, to grow our sales and marketing. And it's pretty interesting in the nonprofit world when you try to run after those things. We're like, hey, would you like to invest in technology? It's not a very common thing in the nonprofit world, especially when you have a social mission or you're kind of focused on the ESG components. There's always an aspect of, are you aligned with that foundation's objectives that year? And so
very hard to make a long-term plan.
Yeah, it's not a long-term plan. It's not like hey, where do you want to be? It's not patient capital. Like, oh, okay, I get this idea. And maybe
it's such a shame because you think it could be. People always blame short-term thinking and investors on the public markets and stuff like that. Yet it's the plague of the NGO sector.
Well, that's exactly it. I remember 1 year, and this kind of fed my conviction to make a conversion along with Leila was, we had this huge foundation we had done work with. They loved our results, and they were focused on youth employment and digital upskilling. We're like, great. And then the next year they changed it
right on track. Yeah.
We're like, oh, this is awesome. The next year, grants up for renewal or for submitting for a new grant. And they're like, we've changed our focus to agriculture. I was like, okay. So I was like, all right, well, we have an office that
I shouldn't laugh. It must have been really stressful.
It is kind of funny. I look back, I can definitely laugh now, Eric. But at that time, I was like, okay, now how do I connect the dots to make sure that we tie back to agriculture? So I was like, okay, we have an office in northern Uganda. They're mostly farmers, but we provide digital work, which actually, helps the environment because they're tilling less of the land. And
I've written some grants in my day too. I know you do whatever it takes, but
it was like,
before you continue with the conversion story, I think one thing that's really important for people to understand is explain why having your own technology platform was so important and why those investments were necessary. Because I think a lot of people who come from a nonprofit perspective would say, that we'll just license the technology from someone else, or why do you need to build your own technology? That's something that for-profit companies do. But here, the impact that you're trying to drive, software was such a necessary part of that. It wasn't something you could just grab off the shelf. So explain why that was an important thing to raise, that you needed the resources to raise money to do that.
Oh, absolutely. So we've number one, we knew that to get data from our clients, because all of this is about structuring and enriching data, you need to be able to ingest the data. And so, having a software with flexible APIs, but beyond that, our stakeholder is the impact associate doing the annotation. So we've got to worry a ton about what is the user experience, how do we ensure quality, and there wasn't any open source or really software that was out there on the market that would allow us to do the things that we needed to do to make this a really efficient and effective, process for the annotator. So that was basically our thesis. We'd proven it because we'd spent some time building the software and able to, manage the work. But then to do this particular kind of work, we had to actually bring our, machine learning into the platform to help process the data, streamline how it was delivered. Anyhow, long story short is we knew we needed that. Beyond that, what we need to do is to grow sales as well, right? How we create more jobs is to close more deals. And so we're like, all right, if we go and we actually get some sort of investment, who might also actually be able to connect us to find the right talent, to engineers to salespeople, et cetera. So when we took a look at this, not only was there a lack of appetite to get, large grants and large commitments from the nonprofit world that would sustain us and to be competitive, because after a while, it started to be competitive. AI became, and annotation became a huge thing. We're like, hey, if we don't make the investments, this could be an existential challenge. We really have to get out there and lead. We don't want to go into the oblivion. This is important for so many reasons, not only being a proof point for the mission, but for the couple thousand people that were already working for us. So we didn't take this as a, let's think about it. Let's see how it goes. It was a deep conversation. We had extensive discussions with our nonprofit board, and ultimately determined that for us to be able to not just kind of survive, but also thrive and really create the impact that we wanted to, going down the venture funded path was going to be critical. It not only would give us access to the level of funds with believe it or not, more patient capital, like behind the idea, as opposed to, what the mission, what the kind of foundation's focuses were. And then second, it would also allow us, kind of access to the resources and tools. So all the reasons why, people are looking for the right types of investors is, do they have software experience? Well, that's really what we were looking for. It wasn't just about money. It was, okay, hey, we're making this transition. We need to find the right partners who get our impact, but also understand technology can help us grow.
So walk us through the mechanics. How does a nonprofit become a for-profit company?
So it is a very interesting process. So there is a formal process. And because we're incorporated in the state of California, we needed to work with the Attorney General's office. We had to submit a very a specific application and basically prove that as we were making a transition from nonprofit to for-profit, that there would not be any excess benefit to the nonprofit. Because for years it had been getting, basically supported tax-free, right, from the state of California. And actually, a nonprofit is owned by the people of the state of California. Like at the end of the day, the ownership is really to the people, not to the individual. So going through a nonprofit conversion was very interesting. Is that we went through all the checks and balances, and it was a really fascinating process, Eric, because most companies who do this are like bakeries and catering companies and very small businesses, rarely above $1 million. We're like, we're a $15 million technology company and we want to make this transition. So it took like 6 or 7 months and like huge amounts of documentation. And at the end of the day, we had to, separate all the assets between the nonprofit and the for-profit. And the key was effectively that we made a decision to in creating this moving from nonprofit to for-profit, that effectively we separated the business's assets from the nonprofit programs. And then in exchange for basically setting up this for-profit, the nonprofit got 100% ownership of those assets. So it was almost like creating a subsidiary. Basically.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to understand when we talk about conversion, there's actually now two entities, where before there was one. It was much more like mitosis than it is like a replacement. Yes. And the foundation, as the owner of the subsidiary, has the stewardship responsibility to make sure that it stays on mission.
That's exactly right. So it is not exactly like shutting down one company and then starting another. And it's not like a one-to-one conversion. They call it a conversion, but it really was split into two companies. And then the for-profit company, Sama, basically became almost like a subsidiary of the Leila Janah Foundation. And what it really ultimately meant was that the foundation was the 100% shareholder of Sama. And in that process of making the conversion, just to get a little bit more technical here, there was a requirement to not have any excess benefit. So what I mean by that is that typically, when a founder starts a business, if it's a for-profit, they have 100% of the shares. In this case, because we started as a nonprofit, the state allowed us to designate a small portion of those shares that were created to the employees, but it was a very small portion. It was sub 15%.
And then the for-profit investor said you went to venture investors. They invested only in the for-profit subsidiary, and that effectively diluted the foundation's ownership down from 100%.
That's exactly right. So through Series B, Leila Janah Foundation, the foundation is still by far the largest shareholder, and it probably would be through Series C and
Mm-hmm.
for a while from there.
And the foundation appoints members to the board. How is the foundation's interest represented in the governance of the company?
So when we set that up, this is one of the reasons why I also thought it was clever, kind of a belt and suspenders, is that with a large shareholder, you get representation on the board. So we have a member of the foundation that sits on the board, which is key. Gets to vote, a voting member who gets to vote on, of course, all of the important items. The other thing that we made clear to our investors as well is that as soon as we were going to make that conversion, we would become a certified benefit corporation. So that was actually part of their understanding coming into this, that we would also want to put, those clear, independent, requirements into this. And beyond that, we decided, okay, well, on top of that, why don't we also find some impact investors? So we have a combination of for-profit investors, impact investors, and so our board makeup basically is an independent board chair, a couple of for-profit VCs from Series A, Series B, and our foundation chair, and myself. So it strikes a really nice balance, and also because the foundation is a shareholder, you don't get a lot of misalignment, right? So we all want to do the right thing, which is to honor this mission and grow the value of the business. And that was kind of the brainchild that Leila had, and we spent a lot of time talking about before her passing was if we do really, really well here, like if we can create this really valuable business, prove that you can grow a successful business, be very clear and stick to your impact, values, and mission, and hold our operating model. Not only are we this huge proof point, but then the foundation, gets the benefit, right? At the end of the day, this becomes hugely valuable. The foundation then gets the benefit, and the foundation's mission is to spawn other businesses like Sama to continue to create, enterprises that give work. So I've got a list of literally about 100 next Sama businesses that we could start, should we get a really successful exit, So that was the idea, is that we're all marching in alignment. And so I think, when we talk about, where's there a right way to do it, it kind of sits in the governance, and beyond the governance, it's, do you have a shared vision or shared outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That to me is one of the most important and neglected aspects of governance. There's basically the two dimensions of governance that I think are so important that people don't give nearly enough attention to are coherence and integrity. And Sama, to me, is just such a beautiful example of both. You have to have that feeling of alignment, that the whole organization is pulling towards some purpose, without which it can't achieve extraordinary things. It's not possible. But then integrity is also really important, because why? I think about, you're building a product that spans continents, that requires cooperation between people who may never meet and would never have met if not for Sama. We're bringing so many stakeholders together from so many different places in an industry, especially in the outsourcing, that has a history of abuse and exploitation and a lot of bad behaviors. And that has cut both ways. It has meant that people who are employed in those companies have had bad outcomes, but also plenty of companies have felt defrauded, cheated. They can't supervise the work product. They don't know what's going on. So trustworthiness is such a powerful asset to have on your balance sheet, for all those people to trust that you will help them achieve their goals if they partner with you. It requires making long-term commitments. It requires people to reciprocate that long-term commitment. And it wouldn't work, I don't think, if it wasn't such a high integrity team. If investors could show up at any time and just knock you off mission or force you to betray the promises that you've made, nobody would believe those promises. You wouldn't last 5 seconds. And yet, by following this path, it's led you to a lot of business success.
Yeah, it's that's 100% it, because if you don't have integrity, and you in particular, what I'd say is don't have investors that align towards that, I think you're kind of cooked from the beginning. So putting, not only identifying the right investors, but being as upfront as possible that, this is our committed, social mission. And we let everybody know, by the way, beyond, being a B Corp, we are going to transition to be a public benefit corporation. So then even as part of that legal framework, there's an opportunity to raise items as it relates to the impact. So there's a mechanism if there is really any concern over any conflict between impact and profit.
This episode is brought to you by my longtime friends at Neo4j, the graph database and analytics leader. Graph databases are based on the idea that relationships are everywhere. They help us understand the world around us. It's how our brains work, how the world works, and how data should work as a digital expression of our world. Graph is different. Relationships are the heart of graph databases. They find hidden patterns across billions of data connections deeply, easily, and quickly. It's why Neo4j is used by more than 75 of the Fortune 100 to solve problems such as curing cancer, going to Mars, investigative journalism, and hundreds of other use cases. Knowledge graphs have emerged as a central part of the generative AI stack. Gartner calls them the missing link between data and AI. Adding a knowledge graph to your AI applications leads to more accurate and complete results, accelerated development, and explainable AI decisions. All on the foundation of an enterprise-strength cloud database. Go to neo4j.com/ERIC to learn more.
We are all taught and indoctrinated, I think is the right word, that business, capitalism, competition, seeking profit is an inevitable race to the bottom. That at the end of the day, you're going to treat people as badly as you can get away with. And here we're talking about, so-called lowest common denominator labor that, it should be a complete commodity and can be easily replaced. We think about the history of globalization of, going to one region after another and seeking the lowest wages and the least worker protections. Therefore, according to that theory, your commitment to treat people in this respectful way should be a major liability. In fact, the success of Sama is kind of impossible according to these theories, because you would face competition from people who would undercut you by price and would drive you out of business. And yet here you are. So I'm curious, you're like living proof that there's something wrong with the theory that we've all been taught. And I'm curious what your experience has been like, kind of having this extra requirement that you have to operate against, and whether you feel like that's been a competitive advantage or a disadvantage.
It's really interesting. I've felt at times both. If I'm being honest, Eric, I've felt at times both, because there's no question that there's pricing pressure, and there are going to be those clients and those companies who want to push a race to the bottom. But the way that we really tried to approach this, and I think it helped being a nonprofit first, honestly, is that we had total clarity on our mission, right? Like, we're committed to living wages. We're committed to formal employment and contracts. Like, everybody gets, vacation benefits. These are a critical part of what we're doing, because our whole goal is to create a place where people can begin to, build their next careers. And because we had such clarity, it became really obvious to me that we cannot be there's the are you going to be the cost leader? Are you going to be a premium company? Well, it became really obvious we need to be on the premium side, right? We need to be in a place to where we can actually command a higher price point. And how do we build that, both based off of reputation and brand, but also this amazing quality product? So we came into this not looking at, okay, wow, we've got to compete for the cheapest, but how do we elevate the value of the human in the loop? And what really is our, kind of real sort of differentiation in this model? And so, and I would have this conversation often with clients, and if I can delve just a bit deeper into, the AI aspect of things, it'll hopefully bring this to a point, which is, okay, a lot of AI is built through the crowd, right? It's a revolving door of people. You go on Amazon Turk or, whatever with some of our competitors' applications, and you're going in and you're getting a set of instructions and you're getting a task. And, those tasks can be paid, cents on the hour. They get paid more, depends on how much demand there is. And I was like, okay, that's great. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're trying to build AI that is extremely high quality and for sensitive applications, so, autonomous driving is a great example. That's a safety-based application. You can't be, accurate 92% of the time, right? 4 out of 5 times. You kind of got to be right almost all of the time.
Good enough definitely is not.
So this idea of being able to say, hey, we've got a workforce that's not only dedicated to you, but they're trained, and they're trained on your specific application. Now, as your model evolves, we stay with you. they retain that knowledge. And we pay people well. So these are super meaningful jobs. So our tenure is, 3.5, 4+ years. Most of the people who come in, and those we've got much larger tenure, it's because they move up, right? So here you've got this valuable set of expert resources that are dedicated to you. And that value is so much greater than something you get transactionally. And yes, that transaction could be a lot cheaper, but you're not going to get the value out of it. So that's kind of an example to where we had to say, hey, how does our business model really create a more valuable product for our customers? So instead of kind of looking at it as, because you could take that exact flip thing. So this is what we communicate, and we say, hey, this is why we actually command a higher price point, but you're getting way more business value out of it. So I've been the first to say we're not for everybody. If you, want something where you need 1 million people for one day, we are not going to likely be, the right solution for you. But you need to build like state-of-the-art ML or state-of-the-art Gen AI. We've got this incredible workforce, this incredible platform. And we could have looked at it the other way, right, Eric? We could have looked at it as, okay, this is a massive liability. We have a commitment to a living wage. And over the past couple of years, inflation has been horrendous, in particular where we operate in East Africa. 2 years ago, it was almost 18%. Last year, it was almost 14%. And you can imagine that while we have our commitment to living wages and we meet those and we do location-specific evaluations, we honor those living wage adjustments. And it's not just the entry level, because if you raise the entry level, every levels above that also have to be raised, because you don't want to create a lot of concern about compression and things like that. So good look. So in that situation, are clients going to turn around and give us 14 and 18% increases? Well, probably not. So what do? We have technology. We drive value that allows us to still be successful as a business, because we are able to not just kind of go on an hourly basis and a race to the bottom, but have different commercial mechanisms to, that yes, we have to make investments in our business, but it's also true to exactly what we communicate, which is we care about having a continuous workforce that is growing and dedicated to you. So it's a long way of saying you can turn what seems like a liability into really what it's really not a liability. It's really a business strategy. And we then explain what is the value of that business strategy. And it, like I said, it doesn't mean it's for everybody, but I think if you don't look at it like that, if you don't align what your social mission is with how you drive your strategy, it's not possible to operationalize it, right? Because if we were stuck in the other view, we'd say, sorry, guys, clients only agreed to a COLA of, or cost of living adjustment to about 2%. So even though I know, things raised by 18%, we're just going to stick with 2 because, that's what we need to keep everything even. And we, we don't do that. We strive towards ways to get to the premium. We recognize that some of the investments we're going to have to make are going to be longer term, right? They're not going to be in quarter or in year. And that, I think, is ultimately created, as you actually referenced, kind of the reputation and the integrity of, okay, well, yeah, we can actually believe you because you're walking the walk.
Mm-hmm. What's so interesting is I'm thinking about generations of business strategy consultants. Going back to Deming, who used to drive him crazy. Peter Drucker used to complain about this all the time. It's a classic. Tom Peters complained about it. Jeff Moore. I can think of so many who just have been driven crazy by the fact that businesses race down to build commodity products and they don't try to improve margins through value. They just think about cutting costs, and therefore they erode their own competitive position. I mean, Deming used to think this was insanity. That as you lower the quality of the inputs, you lower the quality of your product, lower the quality of product, you lose your competitiveness, and it gets you into this downward cycle. So to me, it's really fascinating from the outside to see the ways in which your mission has kind of, quote unquote, forced you to pursue higher value over time, increasingly high value areas for your application, which has led you into the hottest area of them all. So whereas other people would be at pains, I think, to say, oh yes, we saw the AI revolution coming and of course anticipated the new AI and how it was going to work and all the things that it's needed. You didn't need prescience for that. You had the mission. Just like I said, forcing. It's such a funny thing to use the word forcing to describe. You were forced to seek out these higher value applications, higher value opportunities. And that's now a source of tremendous competitive strength.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that's exactly right. It was kind of a little bit of a forcing function, because that's where you got to be if you want to have both, right? You have to be in that upper right quadrant. You can't be on the other end. And it was really fascinating because it shaped our technology. So when we started building built our technology all those years ago, we're like, okay, we need to worry about dealing with enterprises and mass volumes of data, and having this like super scalable system. Yet at the same time, we've got to worry about the human in the loop, the person who's actually using it, our annotators, our impact associates. So we ended up putting in lots of effort into quality assurance, lots of effort into usability, and all of the sort of, okay, we're going to be modular and flexible and recognize that the data is going to change all the time. All of those decisions, because we were also looking at our annotator as like the stakeholder, it brought us to our differentiation today, which is we have like the best quality, amazing analytics. We've leveraged the technology to do the heavy lifting that allows, really our humans to maximize the value of their judgment, basically. And so you tie that into generative AI, and here you've got different things that you're looking for. It's more model evaluation, of course, more supervised fine tuning, but you've got to control for hallucinations. Machines can't yet check machines to see if they actually are building the content that is intended. You need humans to check that. And so that's just another example of how this notion of human judgment, AI, and the value of processing mass amounts of data and having a platform to do that too, which puts us in a really unique position to where we don't have to say, hey, our goal was always to automate it all away. It's like, well, no, we've always had this belief that human judgment is a critical part of AI development. We're embracing that.
I think everyone's heard the phrase human in a loop lately, and if not, believe me, you will. And the mission took you to that ahead of a lot of other folks. Generative AI, I think, is really interesting. We've already had several scandals and debacles caused by generative models going off the rails in various ways. And this is before we even get to the real safety debates as the models get more capable and get wired up to more sensitive systems, how dangerous. But even trivial things like the fact that the certain models overuse the word delve and certain other keywords that are like such a tell that, at least from my perspective, it just seems like these companies are shooting themselves in the foot. You can just tell the problem is they use low quality feedback. As if they had paid the premium to get high quality people in there to actually give the thing better feedback, it wouldn't have made these mistakes. In some ways, by treating the model as the source of the intelligence, we miss the fact that the quality of the human intelligence that touches it is really where the value comes from. And these companies are spending hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, training models, and yet, are outsourcing the really critical human feedback part of it to humans who are working in terrible conditions, who are not properly paid, who are under tremendous stress, who do not have the training and the education to do it properly, and they're reaping the benefits. I should say reaping the whirlwind, right? Like that. This is the thing that Deming was railing about all those years ago. You squeeze your suppliers, and you get what you pay for. And I just think, it's really, really interesting to see how catastrophic those errors are turning out to be, even now, just the dawn of this new era. But I think as the stakes get higher, there's going to be much more of an emphasis from the public, from consumers, from the enterprise customers of these models to know, was this data ethically sourced? Do you think is that like even a sensible, I'm not talking about a data supply chain, but that's kind of like what we're talking about here. Are we going to need standards and, ethical guidelines for how this should be produced in the future?
Yeah, 100% believer in ethically sourced or the ethical supply chain. It's like you've got to know at the end of the day, right? All of this is built on data. You need to know, where did the data come from, and was that okay for you to use that data, right? So you have the data provenance component of it. Beyond the data provenance component, then transparency and, well, who structured your data, right? Because that's where all the value of the data comes from, is who structured or labeled your data, or who evaluated the model, that was generated by synthetic data.
Who did the red teaming? I'd like to know.
Yeah, well, exactly. And were they paid fairly? I mean, think about it. It's like the cacao farming, right? It's like eventually, do people feel like it's okay to eat a chocolate product that was made, by a child, right? And all of that kind of came to light. Well, I think the same things are going to need to come to light, and not just because of the ethical reasons, but also because of the outputs. So imagine this, right? And this is a common thing with the crowd. If you are driven on a task basis, okay, imagine you're working on a platform, and many of these platforms, they do surge pricing, much like Uber, right? Or much like, some of these other applications where imagine you've got a task of all these people competing for it. You start the day, the task is worth like $4. You end the day and it's worth like 20 cents, right? Because now all of a sudden people are running after it. What is the objective when you're doing something task-based? Well, it's to complete the task, right? Because you don't get paid if you don't complete the task. And so therein lies the exact challenge. I was talking to a friend and she was like, oh yeah, I was explaining to her what I did. She's like, oh yeah, my neighbor does annotation. I was like, oh, she's like, yeah, she just does it for fun. And I was like, oh, well, that's really interesting. Yeah, she tells me she goes there and she keeps clicking on it until she gets it right. And then keeps clicking to what she thinks is going to be right. And I was like, oh my gosh, like that's exactly what all the studies say, is that when you're going and you're getting paid to only if that output is successful, you can end up with a crowd bias, right? Which is to say whatever answer you think is going to be right so you can actually get paid. Imagine that versus an employment model where your incentive is, yes, of course you've got to worry about productivity, but your incentive is on quality. You get paid whether your task completes or not, but oh, by the way, you get incentives for quality and meeting these other objectives, right? So it's a very, very different model. And I think when you think about, okay, we're building technology that is ubiquitous, right? It knows no boundaries.
Absolutely.
Do you want, a safety application? Do you want...
I'm just thinking about self-driving cars. You get in your self-driving car, and do you really want it to have been trained on someone's data who was just clicking to get to the next screen so that they could get paid? Like, I don't think people as consumers are yet really aware of how important quality is as an input to this production.
That's right. And when you're, and it's exactly, it's the same way with traditional ML. It's the exact same way with generative AI. Is that if you don't have those checkpoints, right? That tuning those quality checkpoints, the outputs that you get may not be what you expect. And so having a human is going to be able to not only validate for accuracy, but taking a look and understanding the data is going to allow us to understand bias. And that's huge. So having that visibility all the way through to say, hey, this product was made and it's sort of safe to use, if you will. It's, you can't just have like a label that says, well, generated by AI with nothing else, right? Eventually you get to the hairdryer label. It says like, don't plug this in next to water, right? Well, you need that level of visibility that says this is what it works for. This is what it doesn't. And if you want to see there's visibility into how this was actually built. And I think as a consumer, people affected, government should be worried about that. And the EU Policy Act, I think, did a good. They made some good steps towards identifying potential sensitive areas, but they did reference both responsible and ethical AI. And hopefully we'll continue to see more of that, like the executive order from the Biden administration.
Yeah, they have a few things to work on still there.
I would. It did not. I was wondering if it was gonna, get closer to where the Responsibility Act went, but it's got some ways to go.
Yeah, well, and it's everything's so nascent, and the level of uncertainty is so high. It's a really tough area to regulate. I'm going to go back though, because I just know there's some people listening to this. I just know it. You're out there. I could just speak to that person just for a second. I know you're there. Who's listening is just like, okay, do-gooder, woke, whatever, ESG. It's just like that's become such a flashpoint, so polarizing. And like we're talking about the ethics and the responsibility here. But you said something that was really important, which was that apart from the ethical reasons to do it, there's also the strategic reason. It's a key part of the company's strategy that has been a competitive advantage for you over the years. So talk about the for-profit case to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. So Much of the time spent on building models is on structuring, evaluating data. You want to get the most out of your data. You want to amplify that. If you better understand and have more improved quality data, you actually accelerate your development cycle. So we want to help our clients basically bring their models to production faster. And you can spin around and around. I'll use a couple of very simple examples and maybe some more complex ones. But if you're building a self-driving car, okay, and you've got all this unstructured data, maybe the car drives really well in the U.S., but it doesn't do so well in rural areas. Maybe the ML model does extremely well, in Germany, but could not recognize, a 14-lane Chinese roundabout, right? So the data is going to be constantly growing, changing. You need humans in the loop, even as your model evolves, to help identify what those edge cases are. Because by definition, your model doesn't. So you've got humans in the loop who do the edge case detection. If you have a set of employees, or you have what I'd say describe as a closed feedback loop, so it did, humans in the loop who've seen your model and worked with your model as it evolves, their ability to understand your business rules and identify those edge cases is very high. The quicker you get that feedback loop, the quicker your model is you're going to annotate new edge cases, your model is going to get smarter and smarter. By having also humans evaluate the content of what's sitting inside your data, we can ingest all of this information into our platform and see that, wow, your model's not doing well on nighttime images. You don't have nearly enough nighttime images. Let's talk about you getting more of the data. So those feedback cycles, right, because it's an iterative loop, save a tremendous amount of time. And at the end of the day, the goal is to not maximize the amount of data that you're training. It's actually to minimize it. So if you do it intelligently and thoughtfully, with a smart group of humans in the loop and a platform, then you'll get there much faster. So we've actually looked at it as how we can save our clients money and get their products out the door faster. And it's no different with Gen AI, whether it is validating to make sure that the model is working as intended and to avoid hallucinations and bias, or to Gen AI models that are in production. The Gen AI, because it's constantly learning, right, and growing, creating new content. So even if you deployed a model, it still needs to be checked to see if it works against the originally intended parameters. So here you've got people who really can understand your model, and that time to be able to react and identify gaps is much faster. So, well aside from the ethics side of things, just talk to the ML engineers who are building the applications. They'll tell you that that's exactly the thing that you need to focus on.
So your mission has given you like a sneak peek into the future. I mean, you were on AI and machine learning and Gen AI like long before the rest of us. So what do you see as coming in the future now? What are your expectations based on what you're seeing? What do you see as the next wave of AI enhancements? What should we look forward to?
Besides Skynet,
well, yeah. I hope besides that, yeah. I mean, are you worried about it?
Not for the next few decades.
As the one who has to annotate the data to find out what these things know and don't know, you're not
exactly. But I think the thing that we see coming forward that we're really excited about is the convergence of multimodal models. So we see a ChatGPT, we see like video creation, models. Well, it's all going to begin to converge to where you have, text to image and video, and it's going to completely, I think, change the way we interface and create AI. So we're already seeing some really interesting applications in practice, and I think it's going to that's going to be huge. It will affect every industry. So well beyond co-pilots, you're now going to have the ability to do that with images, video, LiDAR data. The next is going to be atmosphere data. You name it.
Yeah, I mean, people are sleeping on multimodal models and what they're capable of, especially because people can kind of a little bit imagine, okay, ChatGPT, but with audio and text and video. But we're starting to get into more of a degree. It's not a matter of degree. It's a difference in kind. When we're talking about LiDAR data, 3D data, atmospheric data, we're talking about models that can really reason about the real world and can, guide scientific experiments, that can operate machinery and do automation in the real world, that can interact with people to amplify the work they're doing, not just the kind of knowledge work sitting at a computer, but even in factories, in construction, and in basically every field of human endeavor. It's about to get real interesting.
Yeah, I think what I get really excited about, I did a talk with folks at NASA a while back. I mean, there's some pretty incredible things that can be done when you start to think about the convergence of all those forms of data. And then there is, actually manufacturing is exactly where my head goes. I think there's a huge amount to be done there. But even the really basic examples to where we're building autonomous, level 1, 2, 3, 4, capabilities for self-driving cars. But, imagine really where the great adoption is going to be in level 2 and 3, where there are humans in the car. Well, it could be as simple as, giving voice commands to your car, right, to drive. Like there are just so many, very practical applications, and then literally otherworldly applications.
Okay, just a quick lightning round here at the end. You very famously talked about what it was like for your employees to have to do Facebook moderation and to do that kind of work before you really made the pivot into AI. Just talk about the decision to do that and then to stop doing it.
Yeah, so it was definitely an exception project for a client who was, like, hey, we need, we want local people to do moderation for these languages, because you can either, outsource it to a different part of the world, like the Philippines or otherwise, or, have local people doing local content, and that's much preferred. We're like, hey, this isn't, necessarily our this isn't our business model. Our focus here is on annotation, but, it makes sense, right? The teams felt a sense of pride to be able to, support their communities. But it was a very, very isolated thing. It was not our impact model, right? Because to be able to do that, you need language skills, you need resilience. Only, certain people could really support this type of work. Was completely different than what our core annotation work was. So, it was certainly quite an experience doing that. We ultimately, came to a conclusion that this is just it's kind of sucking all the air out of the room, right? It's a couple hundred people against our 4,000 plus workforce. It's not impact. It's not the core of what we do, and it's also, quite frankly, distracting from basically our core model, and also from our social mission. And so while it was kind of a separate business, if you will, there were a couple of things that came out of it. One was, it just didn't make any sense to not focus on core ML and annotation. That's what we do. That's what our platform is. And it was not effective for the business. But beyond that, it was distracting. And one of the things that we did that was important as a learning from that was we basically said, okay, that was an exception. It's not something that we pursued. How do we make sure that we don't sort of end up in a situation again where we could end up away from our focus? So we basically went to the board and said, hey, we're going to create something called the service line boundary of work that we will, I thought it was always kind of unspoken, about what we do and not do, but we need to actually speak it and write it down and get it up into the board level. So we created boundaries of the kind of work that we will not ever do and accept. And that is everything from, big tobacco and, weapons to sensitive content, pornography, you name it. So we wrote it all down on lists. And then we said, beyond that, what we're going to do is we're going to create an ethics guild. So we create an ethics guild that includes our impact associates. So representation from across the company that doesn't have any management in it. That basically is the group that says, hey, any opportunity that comes in, whether it is, inbound or otherwise, can be evaluated by the ethics guild to see if it draws anywhere into the gray area. Because we already clearly know what we're not going to do. So, but things change, right? What happens now, many, many years ago, AI wasn't necessarily being used for surveillance, right? So then we're like, okay, well, today, we say we're not going to do anything that is surveillance related. Well, what ends up happening if that changes a shade where the data that's being collected, issues change over time, basically.
Sure, the fine line distinction between self-driving and surveillance.
Well, exactly. So we're like, we need to have the flexibility to evolve this as it goes. So we're going to bring together a team that can evaluate anything that goes around the gray and give ourselves the freedom to be able to add to that. And so it's something that we actually write into our contracts. We're like, this is just the work that we want to do. So one big, lesson learned from was that we have to be completely clear. And so we brought it up to the board. We've implemented that. And now that, anybody in the company can say, hey, this, I'm not sure about this one. This kind of feels like it's falling into the gray. So we just, or I should say not we, because I'm not involved in the guild, but they gave me a heads up that, hey, we're going to review this case. So anyhow, I think that at the end of the day, that is where we were. But I think at the end of the day, we actually had helped drive some clarity. We were able to put some, I think, better practices in place as well.
As an aside, have you thought about encoding the guild into your governance, like either as a committee of the board or as an employee voting trust or something like that?
Oh, that is a really good question. The boundaries are in our board governance, so it had to be signed off by all of the boards, so everybody is aware of what the process is. But is the guild itself as a mechanism? Yeah, that's a very good. I think that's a good one to follow up on.
We can take that offline if you ever want to do that. I have some experience with those kinds of structures.
Yeah,
so it couldn't be undermined in the future if you change your mind.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I thought we'd sort of had it covered by having it into the approved through the board kind of policies and practices. But yeah, I'd love to follow up on that.
Whatever. I don't mean to put you on the spot about it. It just occurred to me as you were talking about it. What a great idea.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. And I mean, I think that's part of it. It's really interesting because we went, we go, just as a side note, going through the board and saying, hey, we feel strongly like, I'm like, hey, I don't want to be in a situation, where we, something, especially as we grow and scale, that like something gets through the cracks or we haven't made it completely clear because this was a decision. We are moving away from it. We need to be totally clear. It was interesting to bring that up to the board to say, hey, we've got a group of people and we've got a policy that says we can decline. A $10 million deal could come in, but if it came in under this, we wouldn't take it. It was really interesting because this is where getting alignment with the board becomes so important. Is when we stated these and said, hey, we need to stay very true to our mission and goals. And even in doing that moderation work, we weren't hiring impact people. Hey, we have to divest this work. We need to focus over here. It was a really interesting conversation. If you don't have people who get the social mission part of it, it could have been brutal. But instead, while it took quite a bit of conversation, well, what does this mean? And so, wow, you really do have people that are outside of you that can basically say no to work. And we're like, yeah, but this is why we believe it's important. And ultimately, they lined up and signed it into practice. So
this is such a great example. Founders are always telling me they want the one weird trick to have their governance be set up permanently and forever with no problems. And it's like, even here you've gone to such lengths over so many years to get it right. It's a continuous practice of discovering new ways, new cracks in the foundation, new things that might get in, and of course encountering new situations in the world that require nuance and judgment to get it right. So I applaud you for doing that.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. And I also, honestly, I think our employees demanded that too. It's like, they're like, hey, we got to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And so it was a really great thing that was not just a handful of people. It was sort of a collective, this is the right thing to do.
They're the stakeholders with the most, they're the most invested in the success of the company, more even than your investors, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was a at the end of the day, I think it's made us definitely stronger for it.
I'm very conscious of the fact that this whole conversation, I've been asking you questions really from an American perspective. It's natural. Here I am in California living my very nice life. I get to have conversations with people like you. It's extremely nice and very interesting. I'm curious if you have anything you'd want to say to your employees and their communities back home. If any of them were to choose to watch or to listen to this, what would you want them to know?
Oh, I hope some people do. Actually, I just came from a couple of weeks in Kenya and Uganda. So you caught me. Hopefully I'm not overly jet lagged, but I literally just came back. Yeah, what I would say, beyond what we've shared before, is that this is really all about empowerment and building skills for the future. So one of the things that really excites me about the work that we do is that it does change. What we did 10 years ago, we don't even remotely do. What we did even 3 years ago in AI, or 5 years ago, like, is there a dog or cat in this picture? And now, people are dealing with 3D complex LiDAR, 2D, evaluating these models and generating really complex responses to some of these generative AI models. What I get excited about is that for all the change, which can be challenging, what we're doing is we're building skills for the future. And every time we succeed, we are in a position for somebody to have a positive outcome, which could be leaving the company, which I know sounds like the opposite of what you want. But if you can create those skills and somebody can leave, that's a positive attrition. So I think it's incumbent upon us to continue to invest. And while we challenge, what we've seen from our teams is incredible. Eric, I promise you, if you saw some of these annotation tasks or model evaluation tasks, I have trouble completing them. Like, I couldn't get my task passed. I mean, these are incredibly talented people. And so the biggest thing is really about investment and growth. And probably the last thing I would say, I guess, is that when we talked about the supply chain, I think this is not something talked about a lot, but, a lot of artificial intelligence is, it's built right here in California, right? By a handful of people and a certain demographic, a lot of people who might look and be the same, right? And when you think about this technology, this technology isn't just going to be used in California. It can be used all across the world. So having diversity and having a seat at the table and representation from a huge, I'm not saying, that our thousands of people are fully represented, but it's important that we have people from Kenya, East Africa, sub-Saharan Africa participating in the development of AI. I think it's incredibly important that you have women helping drive and structure this data. We have 53% of our company as women. That was a purposeful action, equal pay, equal job opportunity, because of the, building an ecosystem and the contribution to the communities. But imagine a world where the only people who sourced your data, collected your data, structured and built your models were men, or men from California, or whatever. And
you don't have to imagine it, because we have a serious problem in the industry, and I live it, and I know you do too. And apart from the moral and the ethical imperative to do something about it, it's also an economic imperative. We literally don't have enough talent working on these important problems. We need to. We don't have enough startups being built. We don't have enough technology being built. As wondrous as these technologies are, they're being built by a very small number of people, and the demand is way outstripping the supply. And when that happens, you just get price inflation. You don't actually get the creation of more value. So I view it absolutely as an economic, strategic, moral imperative to diversify who is doing it. So I agree with you there completely.
Yeah. And if we could be just a small part of building an ecosystem, right, it'd be incredible. So they've got a startup community in Nairobi. A lot of them to this place called The Garage. We've had folks who have successfully left our company to go be software engineers. We run a business grant program for impact entrepreneurs. So it's like basically it's where we get to be investors for a couple of days a year and fund impact entrepreneurs. And
the most positive of positive attrition. That's great.
Yeah, and some have built like these awesome apps and have left, but then some have created companies that make shoes out of recycled rubber, like all sorts of things. But the entire idea is like, hey, you build that ecosystem, and that kind of energy, that mojo is incredible, and it shouldn't be concentrated in one part of the world. And then the second piece of it is, why shouldn't everybody in the world be able to get benefit from this AI economy, right? So it's like there's so many reasons why I think it's important, and that's basically what I would share with my teams is that you deserve your seat at the table. Our job is just to make sure that you can get to the table. That's it.
Amen to that. All right, final question: if someone right now is listening to this and they're thinking about starting a company, they want to create change in the world. They have a long-term ambition, a vision. What advice would you give them? What do you know now that you wish you'd known 10 years ago? And how would you advise them to encode their change in the context of a for-profit company?
Oh my gosh. Well, the first thing I would say is align your social mission and your business model. Just kind of was trying to say before that, the social mission was a bit of a forcing function. We'll get that sorted out up front. If you think of either as an add-on,
right.
You will never be successful. If it's like, oh, I'm really a business, but I kind of want to do this nice thing, on the side, and it's never going to work. If it's the opposite, you can't figure out a way to actually create business value, it will never work. So you have to get that set up front. You need to make that call that says, okay, yeah, we are going to do this impact sourcing thing, but we're not going to be in a race to the bottom. You have to sort that and embed that into your strategy. The second I would say is if you are, once you get that sorted out, you're seeking funding, you have to be upfront with who you are. You have to say that truly you are trying to do both. If you do not, you will get squeezed and pushed into decisions that you just don't want to make. And if you do not have the right investors and the right governance structure, you're host. You're screwed.
Yeah, get it right from the beginning. It's always too early until it's too late. That's one of my...
That's exactly right. And I'm so thankful. We went through so many months of figuring out what that structure was. And I'll say, there's also been times where I'm really thankful we said no to an investor that we thought that was going to lead the round, because I can tell you we would have ended up in the ground if we didn't get to that right investor. And it's really scary. You're like, oh, we're a tech company. We want, we're all about SaaS multiples and all these things. And we're like, well, we have these humans too. So yeah, we've got this awesome set of, PhDs and like software engineers, and we're so smart. We look like 100-person startup. And oh, by the way, we've got like 5,000 people in East Africa. So, but anyway, like you don't really want to talk, like you have to be able to be upfront about that and say, actually, we are a unique business.
You can't be in a defensive crouch about it. You got to wear it proudly on your sleeve. And you got to find investors who see it as a source of advantage. That is the only way to create the alignment that these kinds of...
it took me a little while to figure that out, honestly. Like we sort of were like almost a little apologetic about the mission. We were like, well, but we're like, look at this rad technology. It's so awesome. And it took a while to realize that the only way you get there is by kind of wearing it on your sleeve. So I would say that is that would be my next piece of advice.
Wendy Gonzalez, CEO of Sama, thank you so much. Not just on behalf of all the people that you're employing and all the many people who you have inspired, but I want to say, like, as a consumer of these products, thank you for being an advocate for their quality and for their safety and for making them better and for creating this connection between the real craft of how they're made and the people that use them. Thanks for taking us behind the curtain there.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to The Eric Ries Show. Special thanks to the sponsors for this episode: DigitalOcean, Mercury, and Neo4j. The Eric Ries Show is produced by Jordan Bornstein and Kiki Garthwaite. Research by Tom White and Melanie Rehak. Visual design by Reform Collective. Title theme by DB Music. I'm your host, Eric Ries. Thanks for listening and watching. See you next time.